The Alpine region has a very rich textile heritage. It's the place where the textile industry of the central part of the Europe began to evolve. Part of the activities of the AlpTextile project is indeed to research, map, and gather information about the rich textile heritage of this macro region and the knowledge, know-hows, and ideas that have stood the test of time. Textile heritage could today help us in the transformation of both textile production and the attitude towards textiles, first of all at the local level of the Alpine area, thus contributing to the shift more broadly, as textile production is one of the most environmentally burdensome branches of the industry. Although researchers, historians, geographers, economists, anthropologists, ethnologists, and others have long studied various aspects of the development of textile production in this area, the knowledge about Alpine textile heritage traditions and history of textile production is fragmented at the local, regional, and national levels, making it difficult to provide an overview of the whole Alpine level. Based on secondary sources, and with the help of project partners, SAZU research production and use of textiles in the past, tradition and current practices related to the textile production in the Alpine area to provide an initial understanding of the local textile heritage, focusing on specific fibers such as wool, flax, and silk, and aspects of aesthetics and traditional costumes. Archaeological findings, already from prehistoric times, tell us about widespread textile production throughout the Alpine region, based on natural fibers such as wool, flax, and nettle. The early Alpine communities produced textile using various techniques, including spinning, weaving, and braiding, and the basic technologies to obtain natural fibers have not changed since then. Archaeological researchers testify to the fact that in this part of Europe, due to favorable natural conditions in some parts such as Italian Po Valley or the foothills near Hallstatt in Austria, a more complex systems of wool and flax production started to evolve, and that the regional value chains were quickly established, as shown by the data of one of such alliances, like the connection between Magdalensberg in Austria and Aquileia in Italy that was present in antique times. These more or less wide regional chains can then be traced throughout history, and on these premises, larger textile centers were also created over time. One of such centers of wool textile production, starts of which can be traced back to Roman times, is Italian Biella. Throughout the history, this city became one of the biggest centers of textile production, and even today, around 40% of all high-quality woolen fabrics in the world are still produced in Biella. We cannot go on without mentioning here Lyon, which was the capital of European silk trade in the history and is still an important player in today's textile industry, or the Italian Como district, where 70% of European silk is still produced today. But next to the strong centers of textile production, which had a geographically wide value chain, there was at the same time another level, completely local, which existed due to the self-sufficiency needs of the farmers and rural population. Household flax cultivation, a tradition that developed in the parts of the Alpine region and remained present till the beginning of the 20th century, dates back at least to the end of the 8th century, when French King Charlemagne issued a decree requiring all households to grow flax and weave their linen. Production was a family affair. Clothing, bed linen, and textile were made at home. Until the middle of the 20th century, as in some parts of rural area of the Slovenian Pohorje, people still wove homemade cloth, and the fullers, special craftsmen, then further processed this fabric into loden. The textile self-sufficiency of the peasant population began to decrease drastically with the Industrial Revolution, when industrially made fabrics, especially cotton fabrics, became widely available and affordable, which can also be seen in the transformation of folk costumes and clothing of peasants in the middle of 19th century, in some areas even earlier. The idea of sustainability and circularity was deeply embedded in textile production in rural areas of Alpine regions. Data from the 17th century show that there were more sheep than cattle in the entire Alpine region, and then sheep farming in some areas began to increase in the 18th century. But sheep were often bred not only for wool, but also for meat and milk. And the use of wool for textile purposes was the only logical use, especially considering its properties that protected for clothing purposes protected people from the harsh climate of the Alpine region. Today, wool, especially local wool, is slowly gaining popularity again, and local breeds of sheep such as Montafoner stone sheep or Jezersko-Solčava sheep, which were threatened with extinctions a few years ago, helps to preserve the biodiversity of the Alpine environment. From the 19th century, the widespread introduction to mechanical aids at various stages of textile production triggered a process of innovation that had profound impact. During this period, industrial architecture emerged in the Alpine region that were specially designed for one or multiple stages of the textile processes, especially for wool and cotton. Some places became throughout history important centers of textile production, such as Gandino, a site valley of Seriano Valley in the province of Bergamo, where the earliest data of the processing of wool dates back to the 11th century. An initial local breed, the large-sized Bergamo sheep, was at the base of local textile production. With industrialization and globalization of markets already at the end of the 19th century, imported wool began to compete with domestic wool. While the Gandino Valley remained a vital industrial area, the value chain was no longer entirely local. Production relied not only on local, but also imported wool from the other parts of Italy and even parts of Europe, such as Hungary and Russia, but also as far as Australia and South America. Elsewhere, on the basis of a new, very interesting raw material, cotton, industrial centers were newly established, or the textile production that existed until then was transformed. In the mid to late 18th centuries, Switzerland was the most important textile producing center in continental Europe. Cotton had been woven in Basel and as early as 1380 and in Zurich from the start of the 15th century. But Geneva, not yet then part of Switzerland, became in the 17th century one of the principal gateways into Europe for raw and spun cotton, as well as finished printed cotton fabrics such as chintz or Indian. Some areas were not so lucky to transform and retain production. One of such was Škofja Loka area in Slovenia, which was at one point in history an important area of flax production, not only regionally, but at the European scale. During the later half of 19th century, however, the leading producer of linen for sales in Europe faced challenges in competing with important linen from today's Czech region of Bohemia and Moravia. These regions had developed better technology and tools for linen production, which meant that important linen was softer, more evenly woven, and cheaper than the local production. In addition, this growing popularity of cotton fabrics led to a decline in demand for linen, which in turn contributed to the decline in flax cultivation in Škofja Loka and nearby area. The disruption of Alpine textile value chains is therefore not a recent phenomenon. Today, however, small farmers hardly have the possibility to offering their wool to industrial producers. There are no small-scale wool washers or spinning mills. the flax, linen value chain is in an even worse state. We have wool in the Alps, but very limited flax cultivation, and the other stages of the value chains are almost non-existent. But the tradition of textile production based on local resources is so strongly embedded in the people of Alpine regions that in some places local textile knowledge has been preserved until today. Generations of artisans have refined the art of textile craftsmanship with local communities weaving their unique know-how of different aspects of the production processes into a vibrant tapestry of culture and economy. What was safeguarded in one region might be lost somewhere else. In Walmünster, Switzerland, a local initiative is trying to revive growing flax and are organizing a flax harvest festival as was common in Switzerland and elsewhere. The inhabitants of Daucha, a small place in Slovenia where flax is no longer cultivated, but the flax harvest festival still exists, which has contributed to transferring from one generation to another knowledge on processing flax into linen. In the AlpTextile project, we are trying to connect these two communities so that they can learn from and inspire from each other. And that is exactly one of the goals of our project, to preserve knowledge and to connect people. As all around the Alps, there are examples of initiatives that try to use local wool, revive cultivation or flax, or even silkworm breeding. These few examples that I highlighted today demonstrate how the natural resources and distinct geographical features of the Alps contribute to the localization of specific industries and the preservation of traditional craftsmanship. Examining production, distribution, and textile usage unveils the distinctiveness and connections of the Alpine region, providing at the same time a lens to explore the rich diversity of tradition and knowledge within the textile past of the Alps and their present value chains. Our research also highlights how the resource sensitivity rooted in local customs can be an inspiration for current circular practices, unveils business opportunities, and addresses the challenges of adapting to climate change and broader environmental transformations. Thank you.